All right. So, uh, again, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Many of you may know my name is Sherelle Williams. I'm the DEAI Program Manager at the Smithsonian Science Education Center. And tonight is day one of the Zero Barriers in STEM Education Mid-Year Professional Development. Today, we'll be talking about the current state of accessibility in STEM and progress toward zero barriers in STEM education. We have some fantastic presenters who are going to be sharing more about the work that they do. One in particular individual is representing our funder, and we can go to the next slide. We have a representative from General Motors. Her name is Marianne Beebe. She's going to be speaking on their behalf and sharing more about the work initiatives that are underway at General Motors. We also have some individuals who participated as teams at the Zero Barriers in STEM Education Summit last January. And so you'll get a chance to hear from them and learn more about how they've been able to make progress toward their goal in their logic model. All right, next slide. So before we continue on, I just want to take a moment and allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. Unfortunately, Amy D'Amico, the Division Director for Professional Services, was not able to attend today's PD. She's actually at another PD because we stay busy at SSEC. So she couldn't join us tonight, but I will pause and allow my colleagues who are assisting me in hosting this event to introduce themselves. So, Patty.
Hello, my name is Addie Allred, and I am a program specialist with the SSEC. And I look forward to hearing about zero barriers and hearing about the progress that some of the teams have made over the past year. Alex?
Hi, everybody. My name is Alex. I am a program assistant at the Smithsonian Science Education Center working on the DEAI team. It was wonderful to see all of you over the summer, and I'm very excited to hear about all the progress you have made and to spend these next 3 days learning with you and from you.
Thank you both. I really appreciate that. And we can move on to the next slide. I'm just echoing your sentiments. I too am really excited to hear more about what you've all been able to accomplish and just share learnings so far. But first, just a quick housekeeping note. Subtitles are available, so if you would like to turn on subtitles, just click the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your screen, or you can view full transcript on the side of your Zoom window. It's completely up to you, but those features have been turned on or enabled. Next slide. In addition, we're just asking that you please keep yourself muted and keep your video turned off. We are recording. We want to make sure that we have a high quality recording, but also we want to make sure that everyone is able to take full advantage of this opportunity. And so we want to reduce background noise. However, please do feel free to drop any questions or comments that you have in the chat. And we will actively monitor the chat all throughout tonight's session. Next slide. As I mentioned, we are recording, so just be mindful of what you share. Just make sure it's something that that you own and can share, and that, of course, something that you're comfortable having shared publicly. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, we are actively monitoring the chat, and I welcome you to introduce yourself by sharing your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from. And just as a quick note, we are going to be asking anyone who requires ASL to just send a message to Alex Grace, and she'll make sure that she has interpreters in the same room that you are in so that you can receive those services if you need them. I see Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer, how are you? Glad that you're here. But keep that coming. Patrick, Andrew, love it, love it, love it. I love to see some familiar names. I know. I'm not sure if we have any guests, anyone who didn't participate in the summit, but who is joining us because they've heard about it through someone who has. So if you are newer in that sense, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Next slide. All right, so tonight, as I mentioned, we are really trying to share with you a little bit more about what's going on in the STEM industry. We have Marianne Beebe representing General Motors here today to share a little bit more about what they're doing and her personal story. And we also want to take some time and allow teams who have made great progress toward their goal the opportunity to share a little bit more about what they've been working on. So we pulled a few teams to present in the main room, but you'll also have an opportunity to share more of what you've been working on with your team in these past 6 months. So we'll have some breakout sessions dedicated to that at near the end of the session. Next slide. All right, and so as I mentioned, we're going to hear from Marianne first. We'll have our team showcase so you can hear more about what teams are doing or have been doing. And then we'll talk about some successes and challenges of your own and be able to kind of share knowledge in breakout room discussions. And next slide. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Marianne to tell us a little bit more about what's going on at GM.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marianne Beebe. I'm with General Motors. And today I wanted to share some of the accessibility work that's ongoing at GM and especially how that relates to engineering and technology. So you can go to the next slide. All right, so a little background about me. I'm an accessibility program engineering manager at GM. I work in our Accessibility Center of Excellence. Sounds like kind of a fancy name, but our team focuses on building accessibility culture within GM, but also how do we add accessible features and innovations into GM's vehicles? And one of my primary responsibility is working on autonomous vehicles, specifically rideshare autonomous vehicles and making them wheelchair accessible. And a little bit about my personal background. I'm a mechanical engineer. I got my bachelor's and master's at the University of Michigan. And I've been at GM for 20 years. I used to always think I was one of the young ones. And then one day I woke up and realized I've been here for 20 years in a variety of roles. I've spent some time as a design release engineer, working on things like door trim and instrument panels, but I've spent most of my career in vehicle safety engineering, from doing testing with the crash test dummies that you see on the screen to working on designing test systems in our rollover crash facility. I spent some time in Washington, D.C. as a regulatory liaison with NHTSA and other organizations. And then I've also worked in our Global Safety Center as our teen driver safety expert, among other things. I'm married, I have 3 kids, and love the outdoors, gardening, like to travel with the family, stay pretty active. And I'm a bird nerd, as my family likes to call me. We can go on to the next slide. So, what is my personal connection here to accessibility? I've just been drawn to throughout my career roles that I feel like have an impact. And I don't know, many of you maybe as educators can relate that even though the day-to-day challenges of the job can sometimes be really hard, at the end of the day with the work that you're doing, knowing that it can make a positive impact on people's lives, I find that really motivating. So accessibility, motivates me in that same way as well. And being an engineer, STEM is really important to me. And, I want to be able to see children of all abilities to be able to have access to STEM. And also just knowing that, from an engineering perspective, when we are designing things and working on problems, having a diversity of input, so people from different backgrounds and viewpoints and abilities, ultimately yields better designs. And so going on to the next slide, talking about GM's connection to accessibility and how it aligns to our mission. This quote from our CEO, Mary Barra, I really like, that we aspire to be the most inclusive company in the world, but it's not a title that we want to hold by ourselves. So as we are aspiring to be the most inclusive company, we also want to ensure that our vehicles and our services are accessible to people with disabilities. So having this senior leadership support coupled with grassroots efforts that were going on at the company led to GM forming the Accessibility Center of Excellence. If we move to the next slide. And this is the team that I work on. GM hired in 2022 the industry's first chief engineer of accessibility, Carrie Morton. So that's my boss. And our team is about a year old, and we have 4 pillars that we focus on in the Accessibility Center of Excellence, or ACE as we like to call it. The first is innovation, and that is really understanding what are the needs and pain points of our customers with disabilities. And then once we understand those customer needs, then how do we come up with ideas and innovations to make our vehicles more accessible? And then when we get to products and services, now we have these ideas, but how do we actually get them in our vehicles? And that's our products and services pillar. And different vehicles have different barriers, so solutions are going to look different for different vehicles. And then there's the aftermarket pillar, because we're not going to do this completely on our own. There are great companies that are out there today that take our vehicles and modify them to be accessible, for example, for people that are wheelchair users, and sometimes these are very specific needs. So we want to be able to support these companies so that they can do the best work that they can and then pass that along to the consumer. And then finally, our ecosystem pillar, and that's really about building key relationships both within our broader organization, but then also with stakeholders externally as well. So if we move on to the next slide, I was just going to cover some of the initiatives that we have going on currently. So it really all starts, as I mentioned before, with understanding the needs of our customers with disabilities. That's where it starts, because once we understand those needs, then we can start to think of innovations, ideas, solutions that we can put into our vehicles that can help meet these customer needs. And using things like inclusive design so that what we come up with benefits as many people as possible. You're also going to hear me talk about Cruise. Cruise is a subsidiary of General Motors. It's our autonomous vehicle company based in San Francisco. And we're working with Cruise on an accessible Cruise Origin, which is an autonomous rideshare vehicle. And then we also have GM Able, which is our employee resource group that provides support and resources for our employees with disabilities. We also tap into GM Able when we're looking for feedback internally as we are trying to design for accessibility in our products and services. And then we've been engaging with universities as well. So some of the higher level classes that you have at like University of Michigan, for example, is a university we've been working with, and having some of their students work on barrier-free projects for us as well. And then we're working with experts within the disability community in Michigan here so that we can also use their lived experience and expertise to help guide us as well. So if we move on to the next slide. There's a question, how has this increased focus and awareness of accessibility, has it changed our organizational structure? And the answer is yes. There's been a lot of change, a lot of great change. We still have a ways to go, but with the creation of the Accessibility Center of Excellence, hiring a chief engineer of accessibility just really highlights GM's commitment to this space. And we also have improved our relationship with upfitters. So I mentioned these companies like, Braun Ability, for example, might be one that you may have heard of. These are companies that take our vehicles, they change the doors, they lower the floor, they put in a ramp. They do some substantial changes to our vehicles to make them more, bespoke and wheelchair accessible for people, that are using wheelchairs. And previously, we hadn't had necessarily a very productive relationship And so it is our goal now, and we've been actively working to, what can we do to help you to make your job easier? Because that benefit ultimately gets passed on to the end customer. And just, kind of building that culture and awareness around accessibility, and making sure it's a part of the conversation. So, at GM, we look at our center as like a hub, and then we have spokes within the broader GM enterprise, where we have allies in these different areas around the corporation that we can work with. So if we go to the next slide, just I think the last topic here is, what am I most excited about? So mentioned I work a lot in the autonomous vehicle space, and I'm really excited about the promise that autonomous vehicles have for people with disabilities to really expand transportation options, whether you're somebody who's blind, a wheelchair user, cognitive disabilities, and beyond. There's so much opportunity we have with AVs to make them accessible and to really provide increased access to, transportation for people. And then, of course, the Origin mobility vehicle is something that's near dear to my heart, because it's something I'm working on every day. And kind of just to tell that story a little bit more, you see pictured here, her name is Michelle Lee. She's a friend of mine. She's an employee at Cruise. And the picture on the top is one of Cruise's autonomous vehicles. And Michelle recently was able to take her first ride in this Cruise Bolt vehicle. It's called Nugget, if you can see. And she took a ride in Nugget, and no driver. She loved it, but the only problem is that in order to ride in it, she had to transfer out of her wheelchair. So the vehicle could only take her in a circle, because it had to bring her right back to her chair. But now with the Origin, which is a larger vehicle, larger platform, as we call it, now we have the opportunity to make that wheelchair accessible, so that Michelle doesn't have to leave her chair. She doesn't have to just travel in circles, and to really provide that, accessible ride for wheelchair users. But I'll say this is a very unique challenge. Having an autonomous ride share that is wheelchair accessible at the scale, something that's never been done before. When you take the driver out of the equation, it provides for some really unique and interesting challenges. And so it's something that, we're not going to get it perfect from the beginning, but again, getting that customer voice, getting that feedback, and improving the design as we move along is, the approach that we're taking. So that's what makes me excited to go to work every day. And I think that was my last slide. So thank you, everyone, for your time today and the opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you, Marianne. That was fantastic. I really appreciate just learning more about what you all are doing at GM. I'm sure individuals on the call also feel the same way and can relate to this idea of just kind of entering into the unknown, like trying something new, learning lots, and not always getting it right the first time, but that's okay. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep asking questions. And in the important part, I think of the conversation, or the piece that's generally missing sometimes, is like making sure that this target audience is included. So I love that you're including individuals who represent, the disability community in this process as you're trying to figure out what makes sense for them, right? We're not just doing something for folks, we're doing something with them. And so just thank you again for sharing everything that's going on at GM. I'm really excited, and hopefully it sparks some ideas for things that we can do, or things we need to think about as we continue to work toward making STEM education more accessible for all students. All right. So at this time, we are going to transition onto this team showcase. But before we do, I just want to make sure that folks have the opportunity. If you have questions, please feel free to private message or direct them to Mary Ann in the chat. Unfortunately, we don't have time for full Q&A following her presentation, but you may have questions that you want to ask her, so feel free. I think she's going to stick around for a little while to answer your questions, so feel free to do that by placing those questions in the chat. And I will continue on with our team showcase, which is dedicated to allowing a few teams who participated in the Zero Barriers in STEM Summit the opportunity to share more about what they've been up to. As you know, many of you all are focused on enhancing professional development opportunities to build teacher capacity. You are looking about building awareness because you need your community and stakeholders in your community to be supportive of your idea, because this is not work that we can do alone. And some folks even focused on, increasing the amount of accessible programming, because obviously we want to make sure that students, particularly students with disabilities, have access to these opportunities that didn't currently or don't always exist. And so I'm going to pass it over to our first team to introduce themselves and share a little bit about what they've been working on with you all. So, Jana, I'm passing it to you. Of course.
Wonderful. Hi, my name is Jana Mino, and I'm with the Ohio Department of Education. We brought a team to the summit, and this is our first time participating in one of the SSEC's amazing opportunities, and we are just so grateful to be here and continue learning with this group. So you can go ahead to the next slide, and I'll introduce the rest of our team. I'm not sure if anyone else was able to join us. Hi, Jim, on this call this evening. But I know that our mentor provided by the SSEC is here with us, the now Dr. Yujia Ding, and I think she's feeling a little bit under the weather, but if she wants to say hello, I think she's here. We decided to bring, I work with the State Department, but we decided to bring 2 schools with us to this initiative. And we identified one in Toledo, Huckins STEM Academy. This school has an amazing program for students with disabilities, and the teacher, Monica Cornell, really inspired us when we were on a school visit. So we immediately thought of this school to participate in this work with us. And the other school we brought, which you'll see has a slightly bigger team, is Herbert Mills STEAM Elementary in Reynoldsburg, which is right outside of our capital in Columbus. And this school has a really immersive autism unit. And so, but they have a long-standing STEM program in general and have been recognized by the state many times. So we brought these 2 together to have a little bit of geographic diversity across the state in this work as 2 little seeds to start this so that we can grow a grassroots approach in spreading these practices for all Ohio students. We did want to point out that a majority of our team from Ohio identifies as white females, which is representative of the teacher workforce in Ohio and not representative of our student population. So that is also something we're hoping to address with other initiatives in the future, but we always like to call out the elephant in the room because we think that's important. So we can go to the next slide to talk about our problem here. And there are 3 clicks to this slide. There's some animations. Really, what we wanted to show is that there is a lot of STEM industry coming to Ohio, which we're really excited about. You can click 2 more times for me. And the workforce in STEM fields is projected to grow to more than 1 million new STEM jobs in the next decade, which is great. But as we all know on this call, there is a lack of representation of individuals with disabilities in STEM fields. And so as our workforce grows, we want to make sure that it is better at representing the student population and has a more inclusive workforce down the road. So we can go to the next slide and to talk a little bit about what our goal was. So in the state of Ohio, we have a long history of a process that's written into our law for schools that will be recognized as certified or designated schools that are official STEM, STEM schools, and STEAM as well. And along with that process, we have developed a pretty thorough rubric to assess schools that apply for this process, and in sort of resource that goes with that called the quality model for STEM and STEAM schools. And so there's a tiny URL that got a little bit cut off here that you can access the current iteration of the quality model. I like to say that we're always living in the design cycle, so there is always a need for updates. But if you click one more time, the attribute that we are focusing on in this work is the first domain, which is all about helping students overcome obstacles to learning through a STEM culture and really that environment that where all the magic happens around STEM education. there is one line in there about making STEM accessible, and that's all it says. There's not a lot of specific guidance for our educators to make that a reality. So we can go to the next slide. And what we have proposed is updating that section of our quality model to include really specific strategies and resources and connections for our STEM educators to be able to implement in their own spaces and classrooms and lessons. We've broken down those strategies into 3 categories: the physical STEM spaces, such as labs and maker spaces. And that's another area that we are so grateful to have Dr. Ding as our mentor, because she has just successfully defended her dissertation, and that's a big part of it. And we have another section aligned to literacy supports as far as the instructional materials. And then the third category is exposure to representation of STEM professionals with disabilities, because we know that it's important for students to be able to see themselves in their fields, to kind of highlight that pathway and how they can get there. So on the next slide, we were asked to share some unanticipated challenges. And the first one, if you click one time for me, is red tape. Of course, we are a state agency, and we have found that in order to update this document that we have, this quality model for STEM and STEAM schools, it's a little bit longer and more convoluted process than we were initially anticipating last July. So that's changed our timeline, but not our goal. And then if you click one more time for me, the other challenge that we've encountered is really just having the opportunity to make sure that our team, especially our educators, our teachers in the classroom that are leading this work with us, are able to have the time to engage in this work, because it is an additional, oh, thank you, Yugia. Yugia also added it for me, thanks. It takes a lot of time to do this work, and they're the ones in the classrooms with the students doing it, and we want to make sure that that's, feasible for them to do, and that's been a challenge for us. However, if you go to the next slide, we were asked to share some of our project management strategies to work around those challenges, and there are 2 clicks on this slide. The first strategy that we started at the summit was a nice spreadsheet. I don't know about anybody else, but I am a big fan of spreadsheets. And so we just created as many checkpoints and goals along the way as we could, and assigned them to the whole team or to an individual on our team with a deadline, which has been very fluid. We have adjusted that as we go. And if you click one more time for me, we have monthly meetings with our team and our mentor, and we send out an agenda beforehand and record minutes, which might sound kind of standard for any kind of regular meeting, but it has really helped us hold ourselves accountable and stay in good communication with each other. I also want to point out that we found that the structure of the summit and the regular checkpoints of myself as the team lead and our mentor, Yugia, submitting reports to the Smithsonian helped us kind of make sure that we were updating our timelines appropriately and staying on track. And then if we go to the last slide, ending on a high note, a couple accomplishments that we wanted to share since the summit. You can click once, and I've mentioned it a few times, but our brilliant mentor, Dr. Ding, is now officially a doctor. She's successfully defended her dissertation, and we're very proud and excited for her. The next one, if you click one more time, we have actually had a wonderful amount of support within our department. The Office for Exceptional Children works with all of the students with disabilities in Ohio, and they have been excellent at supporting us. As my background is in STEM, and so I don't have as much expertise in the ways of supporting students with disabilities in the way that they do. And so instead of recreating the wheel, they've connected us to a lot of great resources. They've also generously provided stipends to the teachers that are working on this from the 2 schools in Ohio, to help compensate them for their time, which we're really grateful for, because they've been doing a lot of great work. Let's see. And then one more anticipation, or I'm sorry, accomplishment. I have a lot of anticipation about all of this work. Another accomplishment is the external partners we've connected with. One that I will also drop the link to in the chat is called Ocali. This is a statewide initiative that provides all kinds of great resources for Ohio students completely free of charge, as well as professional development and training for teachers. And while this was created for Ohio, it can be a great resource for anyone, and they have been tremendously helpful in our work. We have also connected Ocali with an organization called COSI. It's one of the top science museums in the country. They do some learning kits that they give away and sell in their museum. And one of the things that we're doing hopefully soon as we grow this work beyond the 2 schools that we started with is taking one of the COSI kits and making it more accessible as an entry point for teachers to be introduced to some of the strategies in the framework that we're hoping to publish. We have lots of other wonderful supports that we've engaged with, but in general, we have 2 more clicks on this slide. And that's my timer. We are working on drafting the framework itself that we hope to publish. And then the last is that our 2 schools that are piloting this work with us are going to be collecting some anecdotal evidence and data this spring with their students as a way to provide some case studies and stories to share with other educators in the state. So that's the update for us.
Thank you, Jana. You all have been up to some great work. We are lucky enough, or we have the benefit of being able to review team progress through our quarterly report. So we know you've been doing some great things, and I'm so happy that you've been able to make such progress. And so we just look forward to continuing on through the next few months and learning more about what you're able to accomplish with Dr. Ding by your side. Congrats again, Juju. That's a huge accomplishment, and definitely want to acknowledge that. But moving on to KC STEM Alliances, they have been doing some fantastic work, trying to build awareness in their community, and so I'm looking forward to having you all hear more from Chrissy and her team at KC STEM.
Thank you, Sherelle. Good evening, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. Me and my team, we really enjoyed attending the summit this summer and not only sharing what we learned, but also looking inwardly at our organization and seeing what we can do to further remove barriers for students with disabilities. So my team is here. And it was wonderful to have the opportunity to work with these 4 wonderful ladies who are on the next slide. I don't know if I said or not, but I know Sherelle said my name. I'm Chrissy Chandler, and I serve as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the KC STEM Alliance and the Kansas City STEM ecosystem. Erica Mabion is here. So the KC STEM Alliance partnered with Kansas City Public Schools. We actually serve about 47 public school districts across the Kansas City region and 28 private schools. But Kansas City Public Schools is one of our largest and most diverse districts in the region. And we recognize that we weren't reaching all of the students, particularly with our first Lego, our first robotics program that we wanted to reach in Kansas City Public Schools. So we have the wonderful Erica Mabion. We invited her to join our team for this work, as she has been such an ally, such an advocate, such a wonderful partner in Kansas City Public Schools. And it's so valuable being an organization that works outside of the school districts and works as kind of that intermediary partner to have that person within the public school system. So thank you, Erica, and thanks for being here. Terry Kriege, she now serves as the Director of Operations because she's just that awesome. We had to give her more stuff to do. But when she was serving on this team, she was the Project Lead the Way coordinator. So for those of you who don't know a lot about FIRST and Project Lead the Way, I'm going to get into that a little more as we dive into this discussion here. And last but certainly not least, our fearless leader, our Executive Director, Martha McCabe, is here. And Martha, you want to say a couple of words to the people?
Sure. Thanks, Chrissy, for doing our presentation tonight, but welcome to the rest of the group that is amassed tonight. I know we all had a great time in Washington, D.C. And beyond the work that Chrissy's going to share with you today, I know that we each walked away thinking about other ways in which we can individually rethink the way that we're doing work. And so right now you probably are hearing some noise, murmurs in the background. We have high school students from 4 urban high schools building their first robotics competition robot in our machine shop. And it occurred to me, how are we navigating the machining space if a student is in a wheelchair? What modifications are we making so that they can also reach equipment, that they can have access to the same opportunities to build space, even simple things like lowering workbenches. So I think the opportunity to have been in Washington, D.C. collectively and really thinking strategically about how we are reaching all students has been really important. And we're proud to do this work alongside all of our peers across the country. So take it away, Chrissy.
Thank you, Martha. So a bit of history about the KC STEM Alliance. We started with the idea of facilitating and scaling these 2 best practice STEM programs across the Kansas City region. At the time, there were a lot of school districts individually reaching out for support to the UN Marion Kaufman Foundation, which is a local educational not-for-profit here in the Kansas City region. So the UN Marion Kaufman Foundation decided to start the KC STEM Alliance and bring FIRST Robotics and Project Lead the Way under this one umbrella. If you could go to the next slide, click twice for me, please. So with the investment of with the investment of a $1.4 million investment from the Kaufman Foundation, the KC STEM Alliance was started with the idea of, as I said, facilitating, providing regional support and scalability for Project Lead the Way and FIRST Robotics. And of course, there were matching funds from business and industry that helped guide us along as well. Next slide, please. And so there are just a few, there are our list of funders and sponsors, and none of the work that we do is possible without all of this support. So we really, really appreciate and want to acknowledge our funders and sponsors. So our strategic objectives for the KC STEM Alliance, and I'm just going to go through these real quick on the next slide, is to build a strong STEM ecosystem, support innovative models of STEM learning that improve access, and then support regional growth and sustainability of these programs that I just mentioned. Briefly on the next slide are the 2 programs that we support, and those are our 3 main bodies of work: Project Lead the Way, FIRST, and then our STEM Connect KC, which is our STEM learning ecosystem. Next slide, please. So the KC STEM Alliance has for several years had this focus on removing barriers to STEM education opportunities for all students. That led to the wanting to take a more targeted focus on that. That led to the creation of the position for a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist. And I was privileged enough to be hired a year ago to take on that position. And one of my first bodies of work was this interactive webinar series called Closing the Racial Gap in STEM. And we brought together, we used our power of convening. That's what Martha McCabe and the KC STEM Alliance has been known for, the ability to bring people together. But when we were invited to participate in the Smithsonian event, we had to recognize our board's directive is to keep our focus on that closing the gap, particularly for our marginalized students of color. However, we recognize that there are still accessibility issues, like Martha mentioned, in our engineering zone. So we had to figure out a way to still be aligned with our objectives of our board, but still emphasize and begin to remove barriers of accessibility also for the students we serve that have disabilities. So with that in mind, next slide, please. We, in line with having to figure out a way to do both, we had to kind of go for that low-hanging fruit. And remember I said the KC STEM Alliance is really good at convening. So our problem statement was very much around providing the information to the people that we aren't already, that we're already bringing together. In providing that information to them. So our team recognized that not all students in the Kansas City region are giving the opportunity to access a multitude of the STEM experiences. So the problem statement, stakeholders are not considering students with disabilities as potential consumers of STEM education. So our goal was to increase STEM stakeholder exposure to accessible, relevant, and meaningful instructional materials through a series of 6 informational workshops. So we started taking this information to all of these events that we were already having, but making sure to put a focus on creating a sense of belonging in every event that these stakeholders were hosting for students. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we've already had the opportunity to bring this information to 3 different events. The Kansas City STEM Summit, which was industry professionals, community STEM leaders, and educators. The PLTW Meet the Mentors workshop is where we bring in industry professionals who are working with high school students on their PLTW capstone projects. And then our teacher mentor days is when we bring together all of the regional project lead the way teachers for continuing education opportunities. So at each one of these events, we were able to have a session, which we previously hadn't done, that was all about creating a sense of belonging, connecting to students, creating opportunities for every student to feel like they can be involved in STEM. We really wanted our stakeholders to understand the value of creating a STEM identity in each student. And the only way to do that is to make sure we were creating open, accessible spaces that every student felt like they belonged in. Another accomplishment I would say is the opportunity for us as the KC STEM Alliance staff to really make sure we are truly removing all barriers. For example, we had last year before the summit, we had a First Lego League Explore event, and a lot of the parents were complaining because their students with that were autistic or that maybe had some noise sensitivity issues were really struggling with all the noise in the area. So this year, what we decided to do was host an event that was particularly for noise sensitive students. And I've already sent out invitations to that event and gotten some really nice feedback on how much the teachers and coaches really appreciate us being mindful and thinking about those students and hosting an event that would be set up to meet those students' particular needs. So lots of accomplishments, I feel like, lots of sharing information with our staff and with our community. So next slide, please. Unanticipated challenges. I often get caught up in the moment and forget what I'm supposed to be doing. And so survey completion and tracking impact are a couple of things that I feel like we could do a little better. Really having those who've gone through these experiences give us some feedback and say, this is what I walked away with, or this is what I was able to implement or change based on our experience with you. So those are 2 things we're really gonna have to work on. Not getting so caught up in the moment, because these opportunities are just amazing, and the networking and learning is extraordinary. So sometimes forgetting to put those surveys out there. So those are some things that I definitely want our team to work on. And then next slide. I think there's one more. There we go. Community and staff buy-in. I can say that we have had no pushback on these strategies that we've put in place. Dissemination of information, the staff as a whole has been doing a really good job. Martha's support with making sure that not just in Kansas City, not just in Missouri, but as much as possible, wherever we're invited to share this information, that we do so. And then all of this is included in all of our long-term strategies. So I'm going to go ahead and pop a link to our Closing the Racial Gap in STEM report. And you'll also have the opportunities, all the recordings from the webinar are there as well. So anyone who's interested in seeing that, I'm going to pop that in the chat. And again, thank you all so much for being here and for inviting us to share our team's accomplishments.
Thank you, Chrissy. You all did a fantastic job. I just want to commend you for listening to parents. You had an event, a meeting, and then parents, gave you some feedback and you responded right away. I think that's so important, valuing, the stakeholders' needs and, what they're telling you, taking their voice and putting it into action in a way that really demonstrates that you care about what they're saying and what they want. So that's awesome. And, I'm inspired by that, and hopefully we can continue to do more of that in our own programming. But I don't want to take up too much time praising you for all the work that you've done, even though it's amazing, because we have one more team that is going to share. So I've got Kathy Faust from Oak Ridge Schools, who's going to share with us a little bit more about what they've been up to.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Kathy Faust, and I'm the STEM coordinator for Oak Ridge Schools. That's in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Most of you probably know where Knoxville is, on the east end of Tennessee, so we're right next to that. And with me, I've got 3 other team members. And so I will let them introduce themselves. If you will change to the next slide. And of course, we're not very serious. We're kind of goofballs. Definitely me and Heather are. So we couldn't go too serious with the famous, the nice portraits. So John, if you'll give yourself a little quick introduction.
John Stoltz, I'm the supervisor of special education for Oak Ridge City Schools.
All right, Jen.
Sorry, my voice is kind of shaky this evening. I apologize. I'm Jen Laurendine. I am the principal at Willowbrook Elementary in Oak Ridge Schools. Glad to be here.
And she's also our principal of the year for the district.
Oh.
Heather.
Thank you,
Hi.
Kathy.
Hey. Hi, I'm Heather Lenz. I am a special education teacher and data coach at our high school.
All right. So we are definitely a team that's spread out across the district in different roles. All right, next slide, please. So when we came in, we knew that we really wanted to focus on students with disabilities, particularly our students with learning disabilities, because we identified that we have 14% of our student body, our students with disabilities, that are, and they, excuse me, I'm having a brain fart. Can you tell it's late on a Tuesday evening? But only 14% of our students with disabilities are enrolled in advanced placement, dual enrollment, dual credit, national industry certification courses with certifications. So all of our students, most of those, when we found out, when we really dug into the data, Heather did a great job of this. She looked at the data, and majority of those students, they were really only enrolled in welding and automotive maintenance. And a little bit of early childhood. We have significantly more programs than that. I think we have like 28 AP classes and 14 dual enrollment and like 5 dual credit, and a bunch more national industry certification classes. And we were like, no, this is, our students. Now, granted, if they're really interested in going into automotive and into welding, great. But I guarantee you probably not every single one of them wants to do that. So how can we get our students into more rigorous STEM coursework and get them the prerequisite skills they need to get into these more rigorous courses so they can be competitive in the workforce? And so when we really are like, okay, how can they get these jobs in the area? How can they get into these more difficult courses? We realized that we had a systemic issue with vertically aligned professional development on equitable and inclusive practices. So next slide. So with that in mind, we wanted to pick a goal that was honestly attainable and reasonable, especially when we're looking district-wide, especially if you want to affect students graduating and hopefully affecting something in Tennessee called Ready Graduate. which our state wants our students to have certain ACT scores, certain numbers of EPSOs, which are those early post-secondary opportunities. So to really start making impact on that, it's going to take a few years to really see those impacts. So we decided that we wanted to increase the number of students with disabilities completing AP, so advanced placement, dual credit, dual enrollment, or national industry certification courses by 2% each year from 2024 24 to 2026. So, you know, at the end of 2024, you know, we wanted them at 16%, and then 18%, and then 20%. That's our goal. We knew that it takes time to build this momentum and to get things in place, so we weren't even going to look at that in terms of actually seeing movement at the end of this year. Next slide. All right, so some accomplishments since July. Okay, next slide, please. I just had to make a pretty slide. We presented to stakeholders. That was one of the first things we did when we got back. We wanted everyone to know about the plan that as a group we created. And to get all the people on board to supporting the plan, getting the plan out there. So the first thing we did was we presented our work, our logic model, to our district executive directors. So that's like our superintendent and our executive director of teaching and learning and our executive director of school leadership, as well as we presented it in front of all the principals. And I also presented it in front of all of our PLC coaches. There is at least one PLC coach for every single school in our district. So I presented in front of them as well, so they could understand the importance of the work and later on understand why we are going to task them with something we'll talk about in just a minute. Another thing that we did was that we have something called an Oak Ridge STEM committee. This came about last year. So this was not something brand new, but it's still pretty new. But it's composed of staff members across the district, parents, and our community partners. We meet quarterly and we discuss, major things going on, major events. Like this, just last night we had one and we talked about new computer science standards that are coming down from the state and how that's going to affect our district and our students. And so we talk about different things. And so at the beginning of the year, we actually rolled out our data that we got from a STEM survey our students took at the end of last year. It's called a CAP survey, which basically just stands for knowledge, attitude, and perceptions around STEM. And we also gave our 8th grade students and high school students a CTE survey. And so we presented all that data to our STEM committee. And basically we just laid it out for them as, all of our kids, they don't feel like they're getting equitable exposure across the board in exposure to careers and these like work or life skills, like 21st century skills. And we needed that to be more equitable. And especially there was a discrepancy at the elementary. They seem to have a lower exposure to careers at the elementary. All right, next slide. So then the next piece, which we're just starting, we'll keep kind of growing on. And this was actually a great idea from Jen Laurendine, which is the Train the Trainer program. So I already meet with STEM coaches quarterly. The PLC coaches meet regularly. So it was suggested that we kind of start working all of our district coaches and kind of have them working with me and the admin to kind of help support this initiative. So the first thing I did was, hey, we need to get everyone on the same, the same idea, the same vision. So we had the STEM coaches for the district, and there's at least one per school, if not 2 per school, depending on how big the school is. And we had them create a vision around what quality STEM instruction should look like in any classroom. So it doesn't matter if you walked into one of our preschool classrooms, a 4th grade classroom, a 9th grade classroom, what does quality STEM instruction look like, period. And then once we created that vision, they actually helped me by doing an activity, and they actually created the poster that's on the screen. So they gave me the ideas and we put all this stuff together, and then I just zhuzhed it and made it look pretty and made the poster. And then the PLC coaches were then trained around what this classroom should look like and around these 4 C's rubrics that we created in previous years. So 4 C's in STEM are creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. So we had them trained around all this. And then the PLC coaches were going into the collaborative team time, their PLC time, and supporting them in their discussions and lesson planning and helping them use these STEM, vocabulary and design to use in their classrooms. All right, next slide. All right, and then just really quickly, I've been working with admin at the high school level to create a new high school career academy model. So we're making a huge shift. So every student, by the time they graduate, I think this class of 2024 will be the first one to finish with this. They're all going to be getting exposure to 21st century skills, work-based learning opportunities, and the senior capstone project within one of these 5 academies. We're still working on it. It should roll out next year. But we'll have an industry and innovation academy, a humanities academy, arts, business and communications, health and public service, and advanced studies. Okay, next slide. All right, so a couple of quick challenges. The biggest one is time. Time to meet with each other as a group because we're all over the district. And then time to meet with the trainers, so the coaches and the PLC coaches, trying to get them, since they're across 9 buildings, all together to talk and do progress checks. Next slide. Another big one, I think any of you will find this in a big district or even a small district, is just that balance of autonomy versus alignment. Because you want to give every school the feeling of autonomy to, put their own buildings, their way to carry out their own vision. You want to let them do that based on how their school's personality and how they do things. But you also want to have alignment across the district for messaging and expectations. So there's been a little bit of struggle with that, right? And last slide. One thing we wish we could have done better was just creating calendar invites throughout the year already and just had them in our calendars. That would have been huge. We should have done that because it's really hard to get all 4 of us on the same calendar. And then couple, I guess, oh, there's 10 minutes. Real quick. Next slide, real quick. Just a couple of program management strategies. Sorry, I talk a lot. My name's Kathy. Really importantly is connecting to existing initiatives. It's so important, especially when you're asking things of teachers, is making sure that what you're doing connects to other initiatives going on. Because if people feel like it's a one-off or it's just another thing, they're less likely to receive it. They have to see how it all fits and works together. We have a portrait of a graduate right now that's been the big focus of our district. And so we kind of really pushing to show how, hey, portrait of a graduate works with PLCs, which works with STEM, and showing that alignment's been really important. And then last but not least is just, John, you can say this real quick about the retaining and recruiting.
So like Martha McCabe said from the KC STEM Alliance, since we've been in DC, we've really been thinking about every area where we can, improve not only our numbers 2% annually with students with disabilities in, upper level classes, but just what do we need to do to make it better systemically? So one issue that Ms. Laurendine and I and our mentor Dakita discussed was making sure that all students have the prerequisite skills necessary. So our teachers that are working with our students with maybe an emotional disturbance, students with autism, a lot of times those students, it is very difficult to get through the day with those students, but they have so much potential. So we have really focused on, hard to staff bonuses for our teachers that are working in these these areas that it's hard to keep teachers. We're hiring 40 to 50% of these teachers because we need every student to have the prerequisite skills, every single student to have the prerequisite skills from the best teachers, so that all students are graduating Oak Ridge High School with the ability to go on into a STEM field if they so choose. And thank you, Kathy, for letting me jump in there.
Mm-hmm. And just last but not least, for any of you, if you're working with teachers and you really want teachers to be a part of your initiatives, keep it simple and try to find ways to embed it in things you're doing day to day. That was my last slide, because if you can find a way to embed what you're doing, like in collaborative team time or stuff you've already got built in. Maybe if you have short Wednesdays already, like we have short Wednesdays, so they have 2 hours after the day to do professional development. If you can find a way to embed it in things they're already doing, they're going to be more receptive of it. And so that was a great idea from Jen Lauren Dean, is to already do embedded PD. And that seems to be a very successful strategy for us. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate your strategies and information that you shared. I too 100% agree in terms of like aligning initiatives to strategic initiatives or programs that already exist in your education system. They really do allow you to go a lot further because it doesn't feel like you're adding more work to other individuals' plates. And as we know, educators right now are stretched pretty thin. But I don't want to take up too much time talking about, recapping. I want you to have the opportunity to do that in our breakouts. So we are going to give you about just under 20 minutes to talk about what you've heard, share from your own experiences, which of the team's successes resonated with you. So what did you hear that you connect to based on the work that you've been doing in your own communities, but also share some things that you've been challenged with and try to get some feedback from others. So we're going to put you in breakouts now. We'll come back at, let's do 6:47, because I do want to make sure that you have enough time to, engage in real conversation. And I know there's a decent number of folks on the call, so go ahead and go into your breakouts. We'll make sure to drop those questions in the chat before you go, and then you can head out. Welcome back to the main room. I did want to take a moment and kind of just debrief what happened in your breakouts. I heard some really interesting things. Obviously, folks are still challenged with teacher shortages, but there's some other things that are going on that are kind of creating challenges for folks. And I don't know if you had a chance to kind of talk through some strategies to kind of overcome or navigate around those different challenges. But I'd love to hear more about that. But I also want to know like what resonated with you from what you heard from the team presentations that happened during our showcase. So if anyone's interested in sharing a little bit about what happened in their breakout, feel free to unmute, turn on your video, and I'm just going to open it up for conversation. We actually have a specific question in the next slide that we might want to drop in the chat as well. So we'll put that in the chat. But yeah, feel free to just jump into this conversation. Like, I want to know what's going on because I wasn't able to go to every breakout room. Any takers?
We talked about, and I apologize again about my voice tonight. I don't really know what's happened since I left school. We talked about just how many different barriers there are and teacher shortages and learning loss and all of these different things. But we talked about how this is a great way for those of us who are passionate to get into that leadership role and, in the recruiting process of staff and things like that. And we talked about Ken Williams and the Unfold the Soul podcast or the Bless His Heart podcast. And just just different ways that leadership can help this and help our schools so we can advocate for STEM and equity and excellence. So it was a great conversation amongst our folks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I hope that you do find like these common trends amongst you all, and one of them is leadership, like realizing that you may have to kind of step in and fill a need where there was no one taking on that responsibility or taking on that task. So I'm glad that you saw that amongst yourself, because that's definitely one of the objectives of this program, is to encourage you all and to support you in being change agents in your organizations and education systems. Alex did drop the question that we intended to kind of reflect on in the chat. But if you want to just share a little bit more about what actually happened in your breakout, feel free to do that as well. I do see, usually you have your hand up, so I'll call on you, but feel free to, like I said, share a little bit more about what's happening in your breakout and the discussion that actually transpired, or feel free to respond to the question that Alex dropped in the chat. And we can actually drop the slides so we can just kind of see everyone and look around the group. Okay. All right, so Yujia, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, Sherelle, thank you so much for getting interpretation, ASL interpretation. I had that at my dissertation defense and really appreciate it. What we talked about in my breakout room, it was really insightful because what we talked about was really validating that, like, I think there's certain pockets of STEM education that we could work on to support individuals with disabilities. So it was really validating to hear that I'm not the only one who thinks, there's certain pockets that we can capitalize on, one, the resources that we have, and two, don't reinvent the wheel. So I think Patrick Miller, I want to say he's in North Carolina. He was saying how they're repurposing different buildings to provide, extra resources for teachers who may not have full grants to get, all their housing paid, for example. So they may get travel, but not housing, right? So they're repurposing different things that they have on their hands, which is something I want to say it was Katie who was saying, like, oh, well, what can we do to repurpose these things, because they don't have the funding, right? Like some districts don't have the funding to pay teachers a stipend to do, X, Y, and Z. And so it's something that was really supportive and welcoming. And then we also talked about standardized testing being something that probably needs to go out the door at some point in time, but we didn't want to get into that soapbox there. But it felt like we were all on the same page. So, I've said it before, but it's been such a great community here, and I'm really grateful to be a part of Zero Barriers and doing this work. So thank you.
Thank you. And, I do realize that there's so many challenges involved in trying to get this work to move forward, right? We have these plans, we go back into our school systems, and then we realize, like, there's just so much that we have to do and compete with. Testing is one of those things that definitely came up in my breakout. And I'm just interested, we have a few more minutes. Does anyone have any strategies or like anything that you're doing that might help to kind of work around that? And one of the things I thought of, and I don't know if this is realistic or not, but how do we utilize out of school programming or community partners to be able to offer those services, or those programs that we wish we could do during the day, but we just don't have the ability to because things like testing get in the way? Is that an option? Is that possible? I don't know. I'm just interested.
So Sherelle, I don't know that I have an answer to your question. I think that's a question that we would all love an answer to. So if someone has something, I want to know myself. But I did want to, back to your original thought about something someone brought up, and we keep hearing this idea, and a shout out to our mentor, Gina. She did a really good job of allowing us to focus on what we could focus on and do what we can do. And that was brought up in our breakout session, that right now everyone's overwhelmed, whether it's teachers, industry partners, in line with something Dr. Ding just said. So we have to figure out what we can do and work within those boundaries. Otherwise, we're just creating another task that can't be accomplished. So that was one of the things that Gina really allowed our team to do, is work within the idea of what can you accomplish, instead of creating lofty goals that we have no way or no means of getting done. And Erica Mabian, she's figured out some ways to, and this is kind of in line with your question, using some industry partners. For example, we used a local engineering firm to help us stand up an event, and we used them for mentors, and she's figured out a way to bring in some industry people to help fill in some gaps where things maybe teachers can't do. We found some people to mentor and coach robotics teams who aren't teachers, but just industry partners who are willing to work with and who want to work with young people in a school. So I don't know that really answers the testing question, but it's just another strategy to help us get these things done when everyone's time is so precious right now.
No, I think it absolutely helps me to kind of understand, like, yeah, maybe rephrasing the situation as not necessarily a challenge, but where the opportunities are, right? This is what we're dealing with. What can we do with it? And like you said, kind of tapping into industry partners, community partners, and finding a way for them to kind of support you in this might open up new opportunities that you didn't necessarily see as opportunities prior to. So thank you. I think that helps me a lot. Oh, that's a good point, Nathan. I see maybe some additional legislative support to help as well. That's so true.
I don't want to say too much, but we've kind of found a good way of bringing in community partners into our school day. Jen Lorndine, you can probably email her. I think she put her email up in the chat box. Her school and her STEM coaches have really found interesting and innovative ways of getting outside innovators into the classrooms. I can also speak for some of the other schools as well. Really bringing them in and utilizing our STEM committee as well has been really advantageous in our district. So if anybody has any wants to ask any questions or learn a little bit more about how we bring those outside people into our classrooms, regardless of testing or not, because elementary, obviously, there's a whole lot of testing. So if you have questions about elementary, Jen can knock it out of the park. If you're curious about middle and high, I can definitely answer those as well.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. I'm going to move on because I know it's 6:56 and we promised that we would get out of here at 7. But one, just want to say thank you all for engaging in these conversations. They will continue tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to kind of talking more about how to build collaborative partnership, kind of strategizing ways to bring more stakeholders into what you're trying to do and support you so that you don't feel like you're alone, and maybe help you navigate some of the challenges that you're currently dealing with. So we will bring the slides back up and I'll just go over the last few slides that we have for you. Okay, so number one, because I always forget about the evaluation, so I'm glad we made a slide for it. Please complete the program evaluation for today's session. Alex has dropped the link in the chat, so please do that. It's very short and sweet, but we really want to make sure that we are learning more about how we can improve, so please fill that out. Next slide. Yep. And as I mentioned before, I'll see you tomorrow. We have our session focused on gaining perspective and strategies on how to develop collaborative partnerships, getting buy-in from internal stakeholders and community members. It's going to be a lot of rich conversation. We actually have a keynote speaker, Alex Generous, who is an advocate for the disability community. She is also autistic and a STEM professional herself, so she brings a lot of knowledge to this conversation, and I'm really excited to hear from her tomorrow. But we're also going to engage in some breakouts that allow us to kind of dig a little deeper and figure out what strategies actually work to tap into different stakeholder groups. So that's it for us for tonight. Again, I'll see you at 5:30 p.m. tomorrow. I will stick back for the last few minutes if you have any questions. And if not, take care and enjoy the rest of your evening.